So I shot a short sketch last week after a lot of like months of around not doing anything, and it was really good. It was a bit relevant to the improv thing we were talking about, because not only was there just some like on-set hecticness because some battery issues, and I'd never used the camera before. It was a good old Blackmagic 6K Pro, which is a great camera, very user-friendly, which I'm beginning to notice about that camera, which is quite nice. However, I've just found out I might have accidentally shot a large number of the shots on high frame rate mode by accident, which means that maybe it isn't that user-friendly. But I don't know if I prefer red camera, labyrinthine, lots of text obtuse, or simplified obtuse. I'll have to figure that out at some point in my life. We use a kit lens, so I did use a follow focus, but the teeth obviously didn't really bite into the gears on the camera very well. I wanted to get one of those strap attachments around a lens, and then I remembered that we can just rent out cine lenses from JMC, which is nice. We've been very generously given equipment from JMC post-grad, which has been quite nice to have happen. There was a lot of uncertainty when we graduated as to how we were going to produce things without that stuff, and we just emailed JMC and they were like, yes, use our stuff. It's very nice. It was very, very nice. On the improv thing that we discussed, I arrived on the day and looked at my lighting diagrams that I had made months prior and realized that the way that I was shooting it, the lovely source that I had built up, which for those on Instantgram, the social media site, saw, I did some like really shitty lighting hygiene, the equivalent of washing your hands with no soap, but it was okay. I made this big 2 meter by like 1.5-ish meter situation, roughly 2-to-1 diffuse ratio. Like it was maybe even 3-to-1. It was quite close. I built that and then realized that in my efforts to ensure that I could keep it up for as long as possible, I didn't really have a huge crew, so it took me a while to deconstruct it. I had placed the camera in such a way that all of the shots were capturing the light on the near side of the face, and it looked hideous. There's not a hard and fast rule, but it didn't look good. It was very flat and like shapeless. So I opted to switch the line to the other side, and I just kept it up the whole time, and I was very happy with that. I was happy with the fact that I was able to keep track of that. Once I have plans, I'm quite averse to not following them because I feel like I'll lose track. I did not lose track. We cut down some shots thanks to it, and I was able to organize it in such a way that I was able to capture some wides after I'd taken the setup down. It was quite nice. I've noticed that part of my shooting philosophy, like I want to get as much out of a source as I possibly can. I'm quite averse to moving it a lot or having it constructed and reconstructed a lot. I don't have the patience for it and it stresses me out. So I was very happy with that. I think I'm happy with the way it looks. Naturally, we've had our inevitable post-production issues because the editor, long suffering, thanks to me, has just played through all the footage and some of it's playing back in slow motion, which means that it could be high frame rate by accident. But that's okay, because you can just speed it up, right? Hopefully we're shooting another one at the end of the month on the 26th, roughly, and I'll have more to post. Oh, by the way, running on from last week's episode, I realized that I've been aware of Kingdom, like Lars von Trier's show, for way longer than I thought, because of Little Brother, the big with the long bones.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You find that too funny. I find it very funny as well. Isn't the joke that he's like the Antichrist, but he's really nice guy? I'll leave it be.
Yes, that could be a conclusion.
Okay. I'm aware that it is Lars von Trier, so you're not going to get many conclusions.
I'm not sure there is a definitive conclusion.
So Little Brother was one of those go-to inexplicable scary images you would use to frighten children who have been on the internet for too long.
Wow.
So I definitely
I wonder how that made its way into your zeitgeist. Really curious to know.
Oh, who would have that? Yeah, would it just... David Firth, basically kids animation.
Yeah, so Kingdom was what, like late 80s and the early 90s?
It's been redone very recently. Like there's been a Twin Peaks: The Return style situation for it.
Yeah, I'm very
skeptical about that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Now that you mention, is there a spiritual connection between Little Brother and Rubber Johnny?
Yes, I think so. And Rubber Johnny was also one of those like inexplicable, creepy videos used to scare children on the internet. The more I've thought about it, the more of all the like the grotesque stuff and experimental stuff that we discussed last week, all of the DNA of that stuff has been woven throughout my development as a human being, whether overtly, like Little Brother being a creepy video on the internet and Rubber Johnny being the same thing, before I knew who Aphex Twin or Lars von Trier or Chris Cunningham were when I was like 9 or something, or like just in the background, you know? It's very interesting.
So I think we got a little segue there. We drifted a little bit into Zeitgeist, and we touched upon it last episode. So I thought we might just try and do a little art history rather than kind of go, do you know this? Do you know that? Let's do a little whirlwind kind of overview. And I think it might be something that could be useful for viewers as well who might not have had that background.
Yeah, like me and any person who went to an Australian public school.
First of all, disclaimer. So I am by no means a historian, an art historian, or any kind of music historian. So this is just my little guided tour, and it's relying entirely on my own interpretations and impressions. At a certain point as well, particularly when it comes to the visual art side of things stray from what we might call pictorialism. By that, I mean something that we could recognize what is in a picture. For that reason, I am going to start at the Renaissance. So what comes before the Renaissance, there isn't a whole lot of development in my experience. If we look at two examples, so this cave painting here is from about whatever now, minus 17,300 years.
2009.
Painting in France. So if we look at that, in terms of pictorialism, we can recognize what it is depicting, right?
Yeah.
But would we say there is necessarily a lot of depth and dimension in it?
Yeah, it's not trying to replicate, there's no realism.
If we then go on to the Bayeux tapestry that depicts the Battle of Hastings, Norman the Conqueror. So this is 1070, 1077. Considering that there is about 16,000 years of development between them, in terms of art technique, is there that much development?
Not really, no. Obviously, these guys didn't have generative AI and the grind set.
Well, how do you power all that?
Baghdad batteries.
So we are then moving into the Middle Ages with this. If we look at Middle Ages as roughly between the fall of the Roman Empire up to the Renaissance, so we're talking roughly 400-500 AD. In terms of general zeitgeist society, the authority on anything in terms of knowledge and understanding of who we are, where we are, why we are, was in Western Europe was the Christian church.
I see.
So a lot of art at the time is religious. If we look at something like this, if we compare that to the Bayeux tapestry, there is some development, isn't there?
Yeah, there's depth-ish, sort of.
But it's a kind of what drugs did you take kind of depth, right?
Yeah, you can't quite pinpoint what or where anything is.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you start looking at the details, it doesn't quite hang together. But so if we consider that,
didn't know Martin Frost was 1 millennia old. No, 15th century. 5 centuries old? 7 centuries old? Whatever.
Does the music and the art seem to speak from the same place artistically?
Yeah, I think the issue, it does. I think there's a dissonance in how primitive the art is compared to the music, if that makes sense.
We got that kind of like reverent, pious.
Yeah.
Religion is serious. Right?
Yeah.
And I think it does hold up with other art from the time period as well. This is a little bit further forward in time. Don't know the exact time, but probably goes together a little bit better, right?
Yeah.
Couple of things happen to move us out of Middle Ages. There's a few discoveries, such as Marco Polo finding the Silk Road to China, Columbus discovering the New World, which brings whole new wealth into Europe. So you get all these merchants who are benefiting from silk spices, those kind of things. For example, all of this gives us this merchant class of people who are
Right.
able to sponsor artists, and we can get full-time artists.
Oh.
Gives them a certain freedom. And a lot of what they do is going back to find sources and techniques in art that aren't tied to the church. A lot of it is about going back to Greek classicism, hence the
Going back to
Renaissance.
it. Okay.
Yeah, so we're talking the age of Socrates, Aristotle, Archimedes, hence the word Renaissance, which means rebirth. So if we now go and think about that, does the music and the visuals fit so well? Or is some difference in expression?
I don't think it has the church-esque reverence.
No, it doesn't. Does it?
The singular small space. I'm trying to avoid the word vibe today because, it'll offend a small group of people.
Now, obviously, a lot of these time periods aren't like Cinderella, where we hit midnight of a particular year and then suddenly, boom, it's a new time period. There is considerable overlap. And the Renaissance has got different expressions in different parts of Europe as well. But do you feel a certain darkness of space in the music? If you had to choose what would go better with the music, would you think of like a bright white open space?
I would think of a
would you
small
think
space.
something darker and more hall-like?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of unconscious bias for us, given that that's church music, but the music does sort of sound like it's occurring inside a room, but all music does that, so it's kind of hard to...
Space and tone-wise, if you think color in music, does this fit?
The color isn't right.
So this image, it's a bit too bright and open, isn't it? If we have moved away from the church as the arbiter of everyday knowledge and understanding, we get something a lot more like this.
Next one.
So first of all, I think, does it really fit with our medieval imagery?
Too joyful, too light.
It is, see? And I think that's kind of interesting that we also see that in some of the Renaissance art. Not all of it. But
I'd say that most of this is much lighter than what we're seeing right now, even in tone.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing with it is, like, going back to classicism, as in going back to Greek classic, both philosophy, art, and etc. It's none of that really dealt all that much with everyday life. Whereas this is probably a bit more, kind of down the tavern, having a good time, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it sounds a lot more folksy.
Particularly this next one, I think really sums up for me that kind of move away from the church. If it plays. So the lyrics for this are pretty much dancing and jumping, dancing and jumping, dancing and jumping. Which isn't what this is about, is it?
No, not at all. There's not much dancing or jumping happening here. It's mostly just maiming and reverence.
Yeah. As we move away from this, there are things that happen here that are centered around two things. If we go along the lines of the history of the entire world, I guess.
I have seen the history of the entire world, I guess. It's a classic.
So the Renaissance, all these discoveries that we were talking about, the New World, Silk Road, etc., kind of sets off the whole looting and pillaging.
Hooray!
Marco Polo brought the wealth into Italy. Christopher Columbus brought it into Portugal. Other nations started going, well, we should go in and start looting and pillaging. So other nations start setting out to colonize and gain those same riches. The Renaissance kind of started a shift away from the church as the one big truth in society. So we get a whole schism in the politics of the Christian church.
Ooh.
Are you familiar with the Reformation and the split of the Christian church into Catholicism and Protestantism?
I am aware of the Reformation.
We get this kind of very, very late Renaissance. So the dominant kind of driving force in society is more discovery, more nations becoming wealthy, coupled with a lot of warfare back and forth between Catholic and non-Catholic churches. We saw in the Renaissance art, we saw paintings moving more towards pictorialism and dare I even call it a little bit more photorealism, if that makes sense.
Yeah, he even call it.
We see a further development of those techniques, particularly in the Baroque art of the time period.
Yeah. I think the use of light is a lot more intense there.
Exactly.
Like, people are beginning to become more aware of the fact that images and life aren't always perfectly well lit.
That is one part, but can you also see we get more three-dimensionality?
Yeah. That guy's arm on the top right of the screen looks like it is further out. Like, it's a very intense feeling of depth.
So if I were to kind of note down the main artistic differences, what we saw on Renaissance art is the start of linear perspective. So the way that parallel lines converge at a vanishing point on the horizon.
Yeah.
Probably more evident in the Raphael painting that we saw here. We see clearly where that vanishing point is, right?
Yeah.
We're also starting to see, compared to medieval art, the way we use light and shadow to render three-dimensionality. And that is the aspect that gets taken to the next level in Baroque art. The linear perspective here is present, but it isn't the driving force in the sense of realism, is it? It's more the light and shade. That is what's later been referred to as chiaroscuro, literally
Classic.
Light and dark.
Which we studied, thanks to you.
The Baroque, the word we use to describe the time period, has later on become almost as a criticism of the art of the time, of something being almost unnecessarily intricate and decorated and detailed.
Oh, okay. I hadn't realized that was a bit of like more of a derogatory term.
I guess if we were going to put it in a really simple term, like you could almost talk about it as being frilly.
Really? Right. Okay.
And we see that in the actual art as well. So compared to Renaissance, see all
The
these
literal
lace
frills?
patterns and intricate details, like literal frills, is very detailed and intricate, isn't it?
Yeah, a bit too much for me.
And when we think of that, we start seeing this in the music as well.
Formula by Aphex Twin. That's literally frilly. You can hear every strum.
And I think we're also starting to move into music that people might be aware of, even if they're not aware of the name and when it's from. You heard this piece before?
Yeah.
It's called Canon in D major, and it's a musical structure where you take a melody, you start it, then you offset it a few bars later, and you start it again. So you get two versions of the same melody kind of intertwining. Can you hear the melody kicked in again, but it's still going from the first instance? So if we think of that kind of word of Baroque in terms of the frills and the intricacy and things that are interwoven, you can hear that in the music as well, can't we?
Yeah. There's a lot going on.
That's not to say that religion is done. Same time and place.
Yeah. But this gets a bit frilly from memory. This song gets a bit... But it definitely starts off simple.
It does a bit, but it's still kind of fairly big and epic and more dramatic.
It's also mostly just one melody for a large chunk of the song.
Don't know about that. There is a bit more going on.
I don't know how music works, so...
The next big development then is with all the riches coming in, with all the kind of politicizing about the nature of who should be in charge of our existence. We move towards what's called the neoclassical period, also running along in society with the age of enlightenment, the age of reason. This is where we see the birth of modern science. Newton writes his laws of physics. Empirical method, empirical thinking, experimentation, observation. We get the invention of the steam engine, so the very, very, very early birth of the Industrial Revolution, which means that in art, we are starting to move away from emotion. Part of what presents itself here is the distrust of emotion in art, and particularly in music.
Is this when art went from being art to pictures of dudes?
That is a big part of it, yeah.
Baron von Factory.
Industrialists, yes. Personally, for me, once I started kind of coupling in the zeitgeist, I was expecting them to move towards even more photorealism. But what I am wondering is, with a lot of the art now moving to portraiture, I'm wondering whether art took on the role of modern photography portraiture.
I'm about to say they could have been using art in more of for more documentation than
exactly. That's what I'm starting to think.
Yeah.
So we have mentioned this. So this is supposedly the piece of music that's going to create super babies.
This is the math rock of the classical music.
Quite fit anymore, does it?
No. This is the music that Baron von Factory listens to when he has his portrait done. This is the waiting room music. Check out how crazy my music is.
I don't know, but I like to imagine that it's more like this is the music that Baron von whatever paid for and commissioned. It's very proper, isn't it?
Yeah, just fun coming from Mozart.
But both in terms of the imagery and the music, does it feel more structured? Does it feel more reasoned?
Yeah, it is anatomically correct images of people with an incredible focus on their clothes and presumably how they look in that exact moment when the painting was done.
Yeah, and very posed. And poised.
Very posed, yeah. I think people might have been becoming a bit more, as people earned money off of Baron von Factory type stuff.
Exploitation of 10-year-old factory workers.
Which, thank God, doesn't happen anymore, guys.
Actually, now that you say, are these precursors to selfies?
I was about to say, there's a very good chance that now that these people were being skyrocketed into being known, there was more of a desire to curate the way that you were seen, which is why stuff might be more posed, more poised. It's kind of like pre-internet fandom, you know?
Yeah.
I could be completely wrong, though. I don't know anything. I don't know anything. I know what a camera is, and that's it.
Right. So the Age of Reason, start of the Industrial Revolution.
So we started off with the cave paintings, the ones that were about 17 millennia old. And you brought up the lack of artistic development, or the relative lack of artistic development between those and the tapestry from the 1070 to 1077-ish area, which I thought was really interesting, given that there's about 15,000 years worth of development between those two things. I think more evidence of the fact that development is exponential, which is something I think we're becoming more aware of nowadays, given that we can just generate art at the push of a button. And from that, we moved on to the Renaissance period, kind of a rebirth of the Classicism, of the Greek. See, I was listening, of the Greek and Roman periods. You've got a lot the early beginning of linear perspective here, with some vanishing points. It's all very well lit and very flat, though. It is all occurring. Most things are occurring on the same plane. and they're all spectacularly well lit. Then we moved on, we trundled over to the Baroque period when everyone was getting really edgy and getting grungy and figuring out that light, not vanishing points, but light can create depth and dimensionality to a lot of...
That's interesting. So you're saying Caravaggio is the David Fincher and Darius Khondji, and Bach is the Pearl Jam and Nirvana. Interesting.
Yeah, no. That's exactly right. Doesn't this look like an old Hollywood, golden age studio film?
Yeah,
it's been perfectly lit with big lights, and this looks like
and very kind of staged.
Yeah, and then this looks like the popular, the hit film Alien 3, David Fincher's greatest work of art ever.
Caravaggio tenebrism equals bleach bypass and silver retention.
Exactly, yeah. And like a lot of movement and a lot of people being killed. And then we trundled over back in this direction to the Age of Reason and the Age of Enlightenment, otherwise known as the Boring Age, when Mr. Baron von Factory had a portrait done of himself. Everyone was hanging out in Newtown, and they were being...
Ooh, nice. I've been using this document for ages and didn't see that. Thanks.
Confused the shit out of a lot of artsy Newtown hang-arounders. That's a lot of JMC's students. Because people were discovering the science stuff that supposedly makes up the fabric of the entire planet, we got real boring. People were having portraits done of themselves and not much else. We went back to people being well lit, frowning, and then that's it so far. We're walking off into the desert with Rebecca Ferguson and Timothy Chalamet to see what happens next. That's really it. You didn't know will return for more Western art stuff on the right side of this giant document. Prepare for the right side.
What's your impressions?
My impression, I had no knowledge of any of this, so it's hard for me to make any particularly strong points at the moment because I have such a limited art history knowledge. I was very interested in the lack of difference here and the fact that you lose track of that span of years. There's a great, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's worth watching, Cave of Forgotten Dreams by a funny German man. You know who I'm talking about. It's an excellent documentary about the nature of art in like primitive human consciousness. It's wonderful. I think he's also it's one of the only documentaries I've ever seen or discussions about cave paintings that tries to single out the artistic intent and the people behind cave paintings, because we inherently don't know anything about them. But he says things like, why did Grunge paint this bull the way they did? What was the intention of this art? Why was it made? I'm honestly quite excited to get to our slightly more methodical painting situation.
What did you think of the zeitgeist, as in how things ties together with the society, politics, religions across different art forms?
Yeah, I think it is very interesting to watch what happens as we started creating art quite spontaneously for reasons we probably didn't understand. And then we were inevitably told to. People know that tapestries like this and cartouches, something from ancient times, were largely propaganda efforts, so there's very little to be taken literally from those. Probably commission, most likely, this painting. This kind of thing, the crowning with thorns, for example. It's interesting to see that the fluctuations between when people were making art for art's sake, whether or not they knew why, and art because they were being told to, whether they were being told by an angry king or having it commissioned. I think there's more art for art's sake to be found here, and I think it's quite nice. It looks less like something like a lord would ask you to put up in his room, and more like an actual depiction of an event and a feeling. And there's less reverence to be found there. It's a lot more open and raw. And I think that as you move into the Age of Reason, we're back at art being asked of people, if that makes sense.
Did you notice how much of it is how much of art development is reactionary?
I've seen the Star Wars sequel trilogy, if that's what you mean.
As in the rejection of what went before?
Yeah.
As in Renaissance breaking with the church.
Your thesis, antithesis.
Age of Enlightenment, starting to distrust emotion, being more post and proper and kind of more concerned with how we represent ourselves.
Then post Age of Enlightenment, we're going to dip into a bit of Impressionism, right? And abstract, or not?
Well, there is in between, but it's interesting how it's very much a reaction to what came before. I think it's interesting to look at drawing parallels to recent developments in society. Looking at, it may seem flippant, but the whole kind of grunge element to Caravaggio and Baroque, the whole kind of the self-image presentation in Enlightenment art. Because when you think about it, I think there is a move away from reason in society in general.
Away from reason or recent?
Reason.
Oh, in general, like overall?
Think of society, politics.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's true. I think reason is very difficult. That's why.
Well, I mean, how much of reason has been rejected in populist political movements?
All of it at once.
I think it's interesting to like cast our eyes back like this and kind of see how much is our artistic expression formed by the big questions that are percolating in society around us. We take this concept a step further. I'm going to start looking at like film aesthetic history.
Excellent.
And then we see this pendulum swing, the kind of rejection of the current mainstream leads to a new aesthetic, a new way of looking at things. Any particular art that struck with you?
Oh, the Caravaggio stuff. I think it's really nice. It's very beautiful to look at. And I love the movement. I love that it's all very, very movement based and very, very like aware of the physicality of the human body. I think it's quite nice. Yeah, I don't resonate with the earlier like Renaissance or portraiture stuff. I don't really know anyone who resonates with portraiture, but you know, I really love the Caravaggio stuff. I think it's probably just because it's more melodramatic, so it's easier for my brain to latch onto it.